we were so glad to have Sam Jolman on our podcast to really open up this discussion about male sexuality. We do talk about sex on the podcast often, and I know, Phyllis, you and I both have shared our pain as women in the messages that we have received, but we really haven't dove very deep into the messages that men have received. And in the newsletter that I sent out yesterday, it actually clicked for me for the first time that I had never really thought about messages that men had received. And in the newsletter, I said that every man that I'd ever heard talk about sex was so confident. They just knew what they were talking about.
Wow.
So I had this perception that men were the ones that had it all together and women were the ones that had all of this trauma and brokenness. And luckily, one of our listeners wrote in and said, hey, I need you to go deeper. Like, this is a big issue. And so that is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open the emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I'm your host, Tera, and joining me is marriage and family therapist, clinical sexologist, Dr. Glenn Hill, and his incredible wife, Phyllis Hill. And together, they have founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And we're so glad you're here.
Yes. Hello, world.
Hi, friends. So again, I just want to say we love it when you guys, our listeners, write in. And first of all, that's so encouraging because we know you're listening.
Yeah.
And also it helps us to know and kind of navigate where to go in it all. Like, what do you want to hear us talk about? And so this particular email just came in this morning, matter of fact. And so we just want to dive in and kind of talk more about just this topic, as you just mentioned. So I don't know if you want to read a little bit about what was said or kind of go from there.
Yeah, well, the email that came in was from someone who initially was just like expressing their pain of, hey, I want more. I need y'all to go deeper about this. And I was like, ooh, we're recording podcast today. If you can send me your messages. And he did. And he was like, boom, boom, boom. And I loved, like, by the end of his points that he wants us to dive into, which we will save for future podcasts. I mean, y'all saw, I was like, yes, like, we need to talk about these things. I got so passionate and fired up about it. So yes, we absolutely love when you message in. And it really has, like, that conversation with Sam, and then even just me processing myself and needing to write the newsletter yesterday, like, ooh, this is a topic that I really didn't ever consider of what messages men had received and what role and effect that's had on women and in our marriages and in how men feel, like all of the emotions that are tied up. You know, I just assumed when Wes and I got married, like, I'm the clueless one. I've heard you say this about you and Glenn. I am the clueless one. I am the one that has all the shame, all of the baggage from harassment and things I had encountered from men in my life. And I had never considered that maybe I was looking at a man on the bed that was also filled with a lot of pain and shame and fear and all of those emotions as well. And so I'm really glad that we can use this platform to talk about both. And so, Glenn, like, I'm curious what you have encountered, what you have seen from men in private sessions and in your own life as well.
Yeah. Well, we share our story a lot, of course. And on our wedding night, I had not told Phyllis that I knew everything, but she thought that I did. And I had not told her that I didn't. And, we often talk about it would have been such an amazing thing if these two, it would have been great if we had some preparation, if we had some clue, some guidance, etc. We didn't. So it would have been amazing if these two had said, we're both just clueless. Not any, we certainly have sexual cravings, but we don't have a clue. So let's just be on this adventure together. And of course, it'd been great if we'd had the connection codes to be able to process through all 8 of the core emotions around sexuality. We didn't. So we missed each other horribly. And again, it's not because I knew Most of the stuff about sexuality I had learned was from my fellow third graders, and I just assumed that it was accurate. And I could tell sad stories of of the messages that I had received that I didn't know. I just thought, well, somebody said it, so it must be true. And this is, which is still true today for a lot of people, but this is long before Google or, long before information was readily available. So I didn't have a clue. I had no idea. So what I hear so often, just culturally, is that sex is vulnerable for women. I believe it is. There's no question about that. It's also very, very vulnerable for men, especially, and I would suggest there's even an extra layer because they think that they're supposed to know. They think that they're supposed to present themselves as though they know that they're, James Bond, all these cool movie characters, and they're supposed to look a certain way. And so they're not able to go into it saying, I don't really know. I really am interested in you sexually, and I have this incredible sexual urge, but I really don't know.
Yeah.
And can we just partner together to figure this out? It's very, very, I think it's a 1% or less of men that have any sort of approach like that. So the vast majority of men are just going and going, oh, yeah, I've got this. I know what I'm doing. And basically all that means is he knows how to get tab A into slot B. So he does that. And of course, that's very much our story. The poor woman is sitting there going, wait, what? That's what sex is about? Well, that's not a real good sell. For me, and of course, it was such an incredible dopamine experience for him that he's like, babe, wasn't that amazing? And she doesn't want to say no, but really she should say, no, that was not only a zero, is below a zero, because I don't even feel that I was in it. I was there geographically, but I wasn't there relationally.
Yeah.
I'm trying to quote you, and I fear that I'm going to get it wrong, but most men know how to get tab A into slot B. I don't even know that that's true because I think that there's an assumption there. First of all, there's an assumption that that's super easy to do, which we work with way too many couples where that's not their first sexual encounter, that often that it doesn't just go easily. And so I think that right there becomes can be an immediate trauma experience because it's those kind of thoughts like, oh yeah, guys should know how to do that because it's so easy to get, the penis into the vagina. It's like, well, no, it's not. And because you got to know the vagina, you got to know what's happening there. Right. So to me, it's like even that. And I think, it's interesting just going back to how the messaging, if you had any at all, I think there's this definitely, if you've grown up with a Christian background, there were certain messages, and I know we've talked about that as far as the messages that I remember receiving. And yet I don't know how often you have shared just the messages that you received, if any, or if it was just like more what was perceived or what you assumed, or, does that make sense? Like, because I think now, because we talk about this so much and we work with so many couples, it's like you begin to see that, men have all been put in the same bucket or the same box or, and it's like, wow, that is, first of all, so unkind and unfair. And that I think there are many men who are really lost on this topic and just don't know where to turn, don't know who to talk to. Because again, there is, even through movies, it is this male dominant, like he's always confident and suave and it's like, that is not reality for most people, couples that we've worked with, that is their story. So do you remember any of the messaging or what you kind of, I know you just shared that, you never said you knew it. I assumed you did because you seemed confident.
Right.
But yet, even in the bigger picture, like what you remember, if any, of the messaging.
Well, just that the man, and I remember, again, way back, who knows, when I was 8 years old, 9, 10, 11, 12, that, guys were always talking as though they were these, sexual conquerors, and that women loved it. I say women, other 12, 13-year-olds. And so that was always the image, that was always the essence that was presented, that's what a real man does. Again, it's bizarre to me to think about. This is when I'm like 11 and 12, having these, not necessarily even having these conversations, but hearing guys talk that way. So that just became my default that, well, that's just what a real man does. He just goes in and of course I didn't think of it in those terms, but he puts tab A into slot B. And I get it that lots of men don't understand how to do that, but they understand the idea of it. So it's like, oh, well, that's all that matters. And of course, we sit with, and I don't like the label even of vaginismus, but we sit with so many couples where vaginismus is a factor to some degree or another. Well, he knows he's just supposed to do that thing. And so he's not even in any way aware of her. And to this day, of course, we sit with young couples where the woman is just told, well, it's going to hurt for a while. And you think about just practically what that ends up equaling. So what we're saying is this young couple, he is going to just see to it. He's going to make sure that tab A goes into slot B. So her very first, and this is if they have some level of virginity, and I'm not judging anybody that doesn't, but whether it's pre-married or not. So then she gets the message, oh, well, that's what sex equals. Sex equals pain. And then, just like in our story, the next day, the groom is going, hey, let's do that thing that brings you a lot of pain. And then the female's like, or not. Let's go water skiing instead. And we did. And that happened over and over and over and over again. And the frustration. So I just had no idea, zero clue. I just knew that a real man just does it. And the it is basically, vaginal penetration. And that was my only mentality. I had no, and I guess I'd always heard, whether peripherally or directly, that she's going to love that. Oh, if you just get tab A into slot B, she will just be ecstatic. So, and again, we sit with couples to this day that they get that exact same message. And so he thinks that's his whole role and his whole goal. And then he does that and she's not ecstatic. He's like, well, she's just ungrateful or something. She's just frigid. And then they're set up on this path to disaster.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me. I think back to the early years of even like the topic of lust and how we just on our own, like I don't remember ever talking to anyone, but we figured out that if we simply shared it with each other, I don't know, the mystery of it, the fantasy of it, the temptation of it just dissipated.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating that you and I figured that out because, we had a lot of pain in our relationship in the early days. And I'm sure it came from you initially, like as far as just that idea of just sharing it. But I just remember, having lustful thoughts or fantasies about, someone. And it was always amazing to me that if I shared that with you, then all of a sudden, that image, that guy became a human, as in it no longer was even something I thought about or desired. And then I remember, and my memories may be off, but like even when you would say something about someone, and usually, we were very active at church. So I would say that was our main, where we met people. But I remember just you, Glenn, sharing with me, and this was in our first few years of marriage, about someone specifically at church. And I said, and she was married. And I said, well, why don't we just have them over for dinner? Because somehow I already knew at that point that this is just a beautiful girl at church. But she's just a person, like as in you've already shared with me what we probably, I would love to hear your memory of it, but I assume we used the word lust, like instead of just saying, man, I find her really attractive. Like, I don't know that was the verbiage.
Yeah.
It was probably more like, I think I'm having lustful thoughts, or I'm having lustful thoughts about her. And so I remember that particular couple, me going, well, let's just have them over for dinner, which we did and ended up becoming really good friends. But it was just funny because it totally changed it from a fantasy of ooh to, oh my goodness. And it wasn't it that you said her laugh drove you crazy or something like she became a person, right? And almost like your big sister or little sister or something. And it's just, to me, amazing that we somehow, that was never taught to us. Matter of fact, wasn't that back in the day when what was really being taught was something different?
Yeah, because what I'd always heard, and I came to faith in my teens, and I had a church background, but, really come to faith in my mid-teens. And the message always was that if you even are aware that there's another attractive female on the planet, then you're a sinner, you're lusting.
Right.
Which I don't know if we'll take the time to get into that today, as far as it's so far from what Scripture actually presents.
That's actually one of where I wanted to go. That's part of the question that he was asking, because I know the damage of that message for women.
Right.
And so I'm curious about the flip side of that, the damage of that message for men. Yeah.
Well, when I was in high school, and for people that don't know, I was actually a co-founder of the Preachers Club at the high school. It's a private high school. So
fun fact,
big deal. It's on my resume. But we were this elite, spiritual, Bible loving group. And we always felt like we were a little bit ahead of everybody else. And so, in school, if one of the guys would be like, "Oh my gosh, have you seen that new hot girl?" that started attending our school. And it was a small school. My graduating class was 77 people. But we spiritual guys would be like, "Oh, we don't even notice such things." And so that became the default, the mindset that, "Oh, I'm so unaware of attractive male or female, but certainly of females." So that was so deep within me that that's what you were supposed to do. That, and I can remember us having conversations that, well, I can't tell the difference between, whatever. I don't know how we would describe it, but this girl, and a 500-pound woman, they're identical to me, which is it was just lies. It's just so silly. And we did that just continuously. That was our positioning. So then, you and I marry, and I remember growing up hearing, a preacher go, "Oh, my wife's the most beautiful woman in the world." And then you'd meet his wife and you'd be like, "Huh, that's interesting," because that's not the way I view her at all. But that was understood that that's what you're supposed to say. And I would suggest a corollary of that. Then the female is stuck because she remembers how she looked when they met and on her wedding day. So she better maintain that same look, because that's what he said. My wife's the most beautiful woman in the world. So now she has to stay looking that way when she's 25 and 30, 35, 40, 50. Well, that's not even possible. So now we've set up this bizarre, weird, I know that I could enter every male, I don't know what they're called. I don't know if they're called beauty pageants, but every male competition on the planet. I wouldn't win any of them. I wouldn't even be in the top 10 or 20. And I don't care about that. And Phyllis doesn't care about that. We're connected relationally. It's not about, well, Glenn is still at age 62, the most attractive person on the planet. That doesn't make sense. So anyway, we set up this weird, unhealthy, dysfunctional, impossible scenario. So then men, at least for me and the group I was with, was taught that we're not even allowed to be aware that a female, you're allowed to be aware that they exist, but you're not allowed to be aware that they're attractive. And the word attractive just means attract. So it just attracts attention. Okay. Has nothing to do with whether or not I want to go be involved sexually with that person. It just attracts my attention that, wow. And, we travel a lot. We go to a lot of beaches. Well, there's gorgeous women hanging out of their bathing suits. I don't have to pretend like, well, I can't tell. We've been at numerous beaches in other countries where, the women are topless. Well, that attracts attention. It attracts her attention too. That has nothing to do with sexuality. That has nothing to do with a sexual interest. It's just like, oh, look at that. It's topless.
And I think that that's where there's a key difference of attraction versus like the sexuality.
Sure.
And the damage has happened when we have sexualized and then place the judgment on the sexualization for the men. And so women's bodies have been so sexualized that even as a teenager, I had to wear the thick straps and shorts down to my knees and like all of these things, so I would not cause my brother to quote unquote stumble. And so therefore then my body is bad. That was the message I received, is that my body is bad. Well, then the message that my brother received, that the men received, was, ooh, if a woman shows you something, you need to be lusted. Like, your reaction is lust. And so the very thing that was taught, they were trying to say, don't do these things. You're actually telling them what to do. Yeah. And so, like, I have boys, and I was actually talking to a girlfriend recently about a pool that she was like, you got to come up here, but after this time, it's, women in their thongs, like, I was like, fine with me. I want my boys to see women in thongs because it's an unsexualized environment. I want my boys to be around women's bodies in a way where they are not being sexualized. And it's the body. Like, we talk about that all the time. This is my butt. These are my boobs. Like, this is my body. This is the purpose of it. And so I think it's the sexualization of it also then created shame for men. So therefore, then if a man did find himself lusting after someone, well, it's the quiet that breeds more shame. So then we experience the lusting. Now I have shame, which that's super uncomfortable. So what am I more than likely going to do again? I'm going to dive deeper into that loophole. And that is where a lot of the damage of that message, I think, has happened for men, is it's breeded a ton of shame in their bodies. And then also on the flip side, for women, we have shame to show our bodies because we were taught not to. So we have these two people that receive these polar opposite messages now getting married to each other and completely struggling in silence because nobody knows how to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's we just don't know how to talk about it, right? And that's what I'm amazed that somehow we knew to talk about it.
Yeah, because what led up to that, this couple that they moved to where we lived from somewhere else. And so we meet them, and this girl was just gorgeous. And so I talked to that, and I think we call them our disciplers. I don't remember, but an evangelist, a minister, a
mentors,
pastor,
something like that.
Something. And as best I remember, he was so excited that he had found a sin for me. Because I was I don't want to say this the wrong way, but I think I was a fairly good, quote unquote, person. So
you followed the rules.
Right. I wasn't stealing things and killing people on weekends. So it's the best I can remember. He seemed very excited that, oh my goodness, now I've got this sin I can help my poor little, idiot disciple with. And so he said, okay, here's what you do. When you're, because we would have prayer circles and stuff when we're singing songs and whatever. And there'd be 10, 15, 20 people in a circle, we'd be arm in arm. And he said, when you look around the room, when you get to her, look up at the ceiling and then look, back down and continue around the circle. And, I'm a young guy. I don't know. I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, he's so wise, he's closer to God than I am. So I started doing that. Well, that made it worse because now I'm just dying to see what she looks like, what she's wearing. And so then I don't know if this was days in, weeks in, I have no idea. But then I ended up talking to Phyllis about it, and Phyllis was like, oh, let's just have him over for dinner. I'm just like, that's a different message than what this guy gave me. And I never told him because I was terrified because I knew he'd damn me in hell, or I thought he would. But that changed everything because now she actually was a person. She wasn't objectified, and it just became a friendship. And I'm like, oh, well, that was easy. So how in the world we did that?
Yeah, and it was so effective. As in, and this, again, we had probably only been married less than 3 years when...
No. This would have been at least 5 years.
5 years in?
Yeah, because we were in Boston.
And I don't know where that came from, even for me to suggest that.
Right.
Yeah. And again, my girls have often asked me about all of this. Growing up in Europe, I had a very different upbringing with nudity and bodies. As in Europe, it's not uncommon to go into what we would consider a Costco, and there would be a giant nude, picture person advertising deodorant. And no one is gawking. No one is freaking out over this this poster or whatever. And I mean, I think about even going to the parks. If there was a beautiful sunny day at the park, people were laying out, women especially topless. And so I grew up in a different culture as far as what bodies were considered or looked at. And then I came to the States as a, young teen, and all the rules changed, right? And so I think, though, my foundation was so different that I wasn't threatened by the beauty of other women.
Yeah.
But I want to slow down and go back to something that was said a few minutes ago, because I immediately, as soon as we moved to the States, I was immediately started being taught, like, your skirts cannot be short. Your shorts can't be short. You can't show spaghetti straps. Like, all of a sudden, there was this long, long list of rules. And the whole thought behind that was, boys are just designed to sin through lust, and you can either basically damn them to hell or you can protect them. And you girls, it's your job. It's your job to protect.
Right.
And I think we've talked about that.
Yeah.
But to me, the incredible damage is what we don't talk about, is that all the boys that are raised with that message, because it's like you're doomed.
Yeah.
You boys are doomed from the get-go with that kind of messaging. How confusing that is. We were raising our kids when the purity culture, even the terminology became, really, really big. I Kissed Dating Goodbye was, hot off the press when our oldest was, 12 years old, 10, 11, 12. And we just thought, wow, that is just great. This is such a great message. And we were all for this message. And then our son, who was 3 years younger than her, he came up right behind that and he goes, that's stupid. I'm not doing that. And it was such an interesting journey to go through with our son and realizing, okay, he didn't buy into that at all. So how can we prepare him better? Like, he's not going to play by those rules. So how can we just openly talk about all of this? Like, he kind of forced us to have to talk about it all.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And it, I think, became a really big blessing for our family, because also our younger girls heard these same conversations because of what their brother was always kind of experiencing. And I know it's not my responsibility to apologize, but I feel like, yes, I'm so sorry that you guys, the men out there, have just been told these lies as boys.
Yeah.
And now you're trying to figure it all out as men, as husbands, as dads. Like, because there is so much damage in this, kind of like that idea that you've kind of been damned from the beginning and set up for the secrecy of it all. I think that's part of it. We don't know how to talk about it. And so we throw it into secrecy. And then, we really don't know how to approach it in such a healthy way. And, I think you and I, amazingly, as many things as we missed early on, it's like we got that one, where if I, was attracted to some guy, I would tell you, and then it would just dissipate. And it would be like, wow, that was really easy. That was super powerful. And then I think, though, together, we've really enjoyed over all these years, decades together, just beauty. Like, we can both go, oh, look at that woman. I love her gray hair. She's beautiful. I would love to get that haircut. Like, we can appreciate beauty of all kinds now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember the first time, and we were still dating, because we were teenagers, but going to Europe with you and your parents. And as you mentioned, going into stores and seeing these massive posters with nude people on it. And based on my upbringing, I knew that there would be a sizable crowd over here masturbating to that poster. There has to be, by definition. Of course, we're going into this store and I'm looking around like nobody's even noticing the picture. And I remember hearing from missionaries, and again, this is when I was fairly young, but, when they would go to whatever, these far off places, native tribes or something, and their first order of business would be to teach these women to wear shirts. And that it was just understood. And again, this is back when I'm 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I just accepted, that's just true. And it never occurs to me like, wait, who decided that? Who got to choose that? This is culture. The men and women don't wear shirts. And for some reason, we're certain that we're supposed to go in and teach them to wear shirts. Who gets to decide that? And I just accepted that it was a God thing because I heard about this from missionaries, in a church setting. So I knew that that was good and right and correct. It was many, many years with so many things that before I ever stopped to ask the question, wait, what is that true? It didn't occur to me because, and again, many years later, when I start studying this, just as far as from a faith positioning, I can drive by someone's house and say, whoa, look at that house. That is gorgeous. Look what they've done to the lighting, to the landscaping, to the whatever. That has nothing to do, because that's would be the parallel to lusting. I'm not craving their house. I'm not mad. I'm not jealous. I'm not envying them. I'm just observing that. That's beautiful. A sunset. I can look at a sunset and go, wow, that's gorgeous. I can drive by somebody's car, and I'm not really a car person, but I can drive by a car and be like, oh my gosh, look at that car. That's a gorgeous car. Well, I don't want the car. It has nothing to do with that. I'm just observing, noticing that that's a gorgeous car. That's the same principle that's presented in Scripture. So to be able to notice that, wow, that individual, male, female, whatever, is really, really attractive, is physically, gorgeous. Okay, they just are. That has nothing to do with anything. I'm just aware that they are.
Can you dive deeper into that? Because I know our listeners are going to go, okay, bring the scripture side in. What does the Bible say about lust, which is what you're doing? But can you just kind of cover it? Because if not, we're going to get a lot of questions about what you're saying. Because I think it's interesting that you said that. You brought up houses. You said, wow, that's a really gorgeous house. And I think, and yet we all have very strong opinions about what a gorgeous house is, as in tastes. Like the house I may choose to think is gorgeous, you may think is, I would never want to live there. I would never buy that house, right? And so I think that in the physical, we all have very different tastes in what is our version of beauty. There's not a written common law that says it's either she is or she isn't, he is or he isn't. It's like very personal. So share with us just that whole concept of lust, because I think there is a lot of confusion where I think just to identify someone as beautiful, some people think that right there is lust, which it's not. So Can you dig a little deeper?
Going all the way back to the Mosaical law, the whole idea of coveting, your neighbor's, house, property, anything. And it's also mentioned your neighbor's wife. So it's all a matter of craving this, coveting it, and quite possibly going about to acquire it. That's very, very different than going, wow, you have a beautiful horse. You just do. I didn't determine if it's beautiful. I just observe it. I experience joy looking at your horse. So, Jesus comes along, and one of the most twisted scriptures ever, I think. Jesus says, if you look lustfully after a woman, it's the same as if you've committed adultery. That's the exact same Greek word. And here's what we have to, and this is one of the ways that early on, I don't know if somebody taught me this or whatever, but when you're studying scripture, if you want to be intellectually honest, just take the word and look and see where it's used elsewhere.
Yeah.
Because things have been so bastardized and so twisted into English that we think we know what it means. That's the same Greek word that is used with the Last Supper. Jesus knew, and I'm convinced that Jesus knew where he was headed. He knew that he was going to end up being killed, probably crucified. So he's headed towards that, counting down the days. I don't know to what degree he knew exactly. I don't really care. So he's setting up the Last Supper. And he says to the apostles, I have lusted after this meal. Same Greek word. So if we're going to say lust is wrong, well, that's wrong. But this is not a drive-through at McDonald's. This is not let's just stop and pick up. I know they didn't have drive-thrus back then. They didn't have McDonald's. But this wasn't just a casual thing. I'm convinced, part of this is my opinion, but that Jesus knew this is a celebration. This is a meal that's going to be celebrated billions of times into the future. So this was not a casual thing. He actually sent 2 people ahead to set it up and plan it with the host. This is going to be a big deal here. That's lusting. That's setting it up. That's planning this whole thing. Well, if you take that working definition, because again, this wasn't a casual just glancing. No, this was very intentional. I assume took hours and hours to prepare. You take that working definition and bring it back here to say if a man lusts after a woman. So to see a woman be like, oh, she's gorgeous. Well, that's not lust. You're just noticing. You're just like, well, it's a gorgeous woman. Now, if you then start following her, if you then start contemplating how you're going to get her number, you then start figuring out how you're going to get to go to coffee with her, that's a whole different thing. Now you're planning, you're setting it up. So it's just so sad that, and again, this century is old. It's just so sad that men think if I notice, again, whatever it is, a house, a car, a male or female's beauty, then I'm lusting. No, you're not. You're human, and it gets down to just the core emotions. You're experiencing joy over seeing this Lamborghini. Again, I'm not a car person. I wouldn't really care, but a lot of men are. They see this Lamborghini, they're like, oh my gosh, look at that car. Yeah, it is. Gorgeous car. Okay, whatever. That has nothing to do with lusting. That's just noticing. That's just observing. That's just what you're experiencing. Now, if you then start following that guy home and you figure out, I think I could probably steal that car. I wonder how I could go about, getting it from him. Well, that's a whole different, that's based on action. That's not based on the experience of it. So anyway, it's just so unfortunate that we've done, again, way back for me in high school, where I was 100% convinced that, and again, it happened for me, just like there were all the other guys, I just lied about it better than most. And my fellow Preacher Club members were better liars.
I just want to clarify one part of that for any listener that's listening. So you're saying that the Greek word used in both of those places is the same Greek word. And keep in mind, that's a Greek word. We are the ones that made the English version of lust. So we are the ones that created the definition of what lust is. That is not the same thing as those 2 Greek words. Okay, I just want to clarify that for people listening.
If we're intellectually honest, then we have to translate it that Jesus said, I have lusted after this meal. We have to. It's the same word. Or we have to change it. We have to change one of them. And unfortunately, it got twisted. And by the time the English version came along, this again is centuries later, that whole going all the way back to Clement of Alexandria, Origen, this whole twisting of sexuality has been, of course, the church leadership predominantly went single men. Well, gee, I wonder how women are going to fare in that setting. That makes no sense that we even thought that was a good idea. But I'm not mad at anybody. I'm just saying that there's no way that that's going to end up being a healthy, balanced perspective.
Okay, now I don't know if I'm confused or if I'm having like epiphanies, but because I'm trying to figure out where the sin is in it. Because there's a word that was used for the Last Supper, right? And the word was lust after this supper, which is not a sin. And yet we always put lust in a category of sin. And then the way that you described it, even with, like, I'm thinking about, someone who is single, they notice someone. I mean, I love the stories, just like our own story or your story with Wes, like bowling alley, noticed him. He noticed you.
He didn't notice me, but yes, I noticed him.
You noticed him.
Yeah.
And it was like, so then to me, if we're defining lust in the way you just said it, that came into play. And you wanted to know who he was, and you wanted to know. And I'm like, there's no sin in that. So where does the sin come into? Because of course, I think about that. I'll never forget. I can still picture when you came in to chapel that day and I turned around and saw you. It was like, oh my gosh, the most gorgeous guy I'd ever seen in my life. And I noticed you. Like, I was like so attracted to you in that split second. And I wanted to get to know you better. I wanted to know who you were. So then, is that the definition of lust? But then where does the sin part come in?
I've always understood the sin part to be the sexualization. So as soon as it turns into a sexual view of that person, and Glenn, correct, that's just what I've always understood. So for me, people always say it's not love at first sight, it's lust at first sight. That's what I was always told. And I'm like, that infuriates me because there was never a sexualization of Wes in that moment for me. So I'm like, nope, it was not lust. So the sin happens if I start picturing Wes doing his thing, that's where it's lusting. So
that is a great question, though. I don't think I've ever heard that before. So you're just
good. Good.
And brilliant people are.
Let's unpack that.
Well, I mean, it is the craving that pushed you towards me.
Yeah.
So that when I came along and hit you in the head with a softball, it actually became a connection. So I don't even know how to answer that, which is annoying. But so, I mean, there is a craving there, and you did pursue me. I pursued you, and that did head us to a lifetime partnership. I think of it more, and I'm not saying it's correct, but I'm just saying I think of it more as we're already a partnered pair. So I see this drop-dead gorgeous woman on the beach in a thong, and she's topless. There's joy in that, and could even be sexual joy, but I'm not going to go spend time with her. And I'm always fascinated on those beaches because the lifeguards really tune into those women just to, make sure that they have the drinks that they need.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's so wild to watch. But I'm not following that woman. I'm just like, whoa, look at that. And it is a joy experience because she's gorgeous. But there's nothing beyond that. So specifically in answer to your question, I don't exactly know how to answer that. I'll have to contemplate that a bit. But I'm talking about because we already have an established partnership.
Well, okay. So for me, right now I'm thinking of married people who enter into the secrecy. So one or both in different directions enter into the secrecy of, I am really attracted to that person at work and I'm not going to tell anyone, and I'm married, but I'm going to pursue a relationship with that person, and I'm going to intentionally build something with that person. And to me, it's the secrecy. It's the
right, but we also have to another word that's been crystallized and bastardized horribly is the word sin. The word sin, that was basically just a made-up word. The word sin is missing. So where is the missing? So Tera sees this gorgeous guy named Wes. She's interested in a relationship with him and she wants to connect with him and wants to bond with him. Well, where's the missing in that? Well, there's no missing.
right.
She's actually on point doing it. And there's nothing, I don't even like the word wrong, but there's nothing wrong there. She's headed in a direction. So for me to see a gorgeous woman at the beach, and I've shared that with him, like, whoa, did you see that girl? Poor thing, her bathing suit doesn't even fit her. She's falling out of it. And that's a joy experience. Well, there's no missing there. I'm just noticing that, look at that. And that doesn't damage our relationship. There's no missing. Now, if I'm like, oh, babe, I'm not going to hang out with you this week at the beach. I'm going to go hang out with that woman. Well, that's a big miss. That really misses in our relationship and our connection. So, again, we have to look at, well, what is the miss? And it boils down to, everybody believes that, your children are starving to death. And I get it societally, if you go steal a loaf of bread from the store, it's illegal. But I would suggest your kids are starving to death. Steal the bread. I get it societally. But yeah, you're taking care. If there's a fire inside the store, you're going to smash the door open to rescue the person in the store. What? You would smash a store's door open? Yeah, you would. And that's illegal, but that's what you're going to do in that setting. And that's not a missing. You're actually doing the good and right thing. So, and some people won't like that, and I get it. But it's all a question, but what's the miss? And for us to ask that, it's just not an arbitrary designation. It's actually what is the damage? What is the miss in that situation?
I want to go back to how you worded it, because maybe you could explain what you mean, Tera, about the word, well, if you sexualize. So
That's what I was always taught, is
Yeah,
that lust is the
explain.
sexualization of it. So if you see a woman on the beach and, okay, so you experience the joy, you experience the attraction. Well, now you're sitting there thinking about having sex with that woman. That's what I was always taught. That's where the lust or the sin comes in. It's the fantasy of having sex with that
But that's
person.
also a partnering with her, even if it's just all in my mind. I'm partnering with her. Well, I can't be partnered with Phyllis and be partnered. I can't.
Well,
I'm
no,
partnered
let's
with
talk
Phyllis
about
and partnered
if
with the
they're
other person.
if you're not married, you're single, and I think that's where among single people it gets really complicated because and I love the way you word it at times when you are someone comes to you in your private practice and they're either engaged or dating and heading towards engagement, and you kind of, and maybe it's always when they're engaged, they come to you for their pre-married counseling and you ask certain questions that kind of ask the question like, are you attracted, or how do you ask
Well,
that?
I've asked, male or female, but especially the guy, so do you have sexual thoughts about her? And 99.9% of every man I've ever said was like, oh my gosh, no, I would never. And I'm like, well, why would you marry her
Right.
then?
Oh,
You
wait,
get to
I'm
choose.
confused. They say they don't have sexual thoughts about their wife?
Because they think I'm going to judge them.
Wow.
And so they know that the correct answer is, oh no, she's too good for that. I would never have a sexual thought. And again, they're lying, but they think that's what they're supposed to say.
Wow.
I think that's the good
Okay.
and right and righteous thing.
Yeah, I just want to really soak that in because, I've been sitting here listening to y'all like process this and really dive into this part of it. And I just want to say how much I appreciate the conversation because it is a conversation that doesn't happen. We don't talk about the fact. I remember it's now been several months where I shared for the first time on the podcast that I had found myself attracted to other men. And there was so much fear in sharing that, so much shame in sharing that because of the judgment. And so we are all walking around lying, like living
Right.
in this, which then just breeds more shame. And this is a universal experience pretty much. In fact, there's someone that I was following who was talking about how wrong it is to ever be attracted to someone other than your spouse. And, just like that is the worst thing that you could ever do. And I listened and I was like, one, you've been married for a year. Two, you have no idea how painful this is.
Yeah.
The judgment you are casting on people by spreading
it's not
this.
even true. I don't even know who you're talking about. It's not even true that it was a male or female.
It was a female sharing, and she said, I asked my husband, he's never been attracted to
and
anybody
it's
else.
just not true.
Well, and so that is what I really hope that our listeners can find the value and not the judgment in this conversation, because that's my fear, is that we do have listeners right now that are like judging this and saying, y'all are bad for ever having these thoughts. Y'all are bad because this messaging, which is the point of our podcast today, runs so deep.
Yeah.
It runs so deep in me, in y'all, and in our listeners.
So let me finish that train of thought, because when I'm sitting with a couple, he goes, oh, no, I would never. And she would say the same thing. And then what I always say to them is, oh, well, then don't marry until you do.
Yes.
Because for you to go into your wedding, for you to go into your marriage like, nope, not interested in her. We're doomed. we are set up for such failure. And I love Bridget Blood. And when she talks about this so much, I want him to have sexual thoughts about her, sexual joy. He does anyway. So let's just stop telling them, number one, you mustn't, you can't, you shouldn't. And number two, if you ever do, then I don't know what, we have to shoot you. We have to, break you up. We have to, I'm not sure what the then is. You just stop it. Stop feeling sexual joy about her. And then, and it's so fascinating to me to freeze frame it. So then they have their wedding ceremony. At what point is he allowed to? When she walks down the aisle in the wedding dress, hopefully she, she likes the dress and, she looks great to herself and to him. Then is it okay if he has that? Oh, no, they're not married yet. Okay. Well, then, when the dad hands the bride to, at what point can he, when the minister says, I now pronounce you husband and wife, then is it, when is it that you suddenly, no, yes, Now it's fine. That doesn't make any sense. It's so bizarre that we think humans are designed that way. He's been having sexual joy experiences with her for quite some time. Last week, I sat with a couple, and I really want them to do a podcast, which I get it would be nth degree vulnerable for them to do it, but they just married. I did their pre-married. This couple is rocking it. It is unbelievable to me. And I told them, I said, the two of you pissed me off because they've been married, the last sister, they've been married 11 days.
Oh, wow.
And what they're doing, and what's amazing is, and I'm not saying who it is, so it's okay if I say this, they had not even achieved penetration yet. They're 11 days in to their marriage, and they married as virgins, and they hadn't achieved penetration, and they're having the time of their life. And I'm thinking, we need to take a picture, a movie of that and show it, because that's what's supposed to be happening. And she was so cute, and she's just adorable and precious. And she said, do you think I need to go to a specialist? We're 11 days in, we haven't achieved penetration yet. And I said, for what purpose? She goes, so that we can, get the penis in the vagina. I said, you can do it if you want. I don't care. I don't understand. I have no thought of what would prompt us to say yes to that. And she was so cute. She goes, oh, phew. I was so afraid you were going to say yes, you have to go see a specialist. Because all that's saying is that the whole focus of it is to get that penis jammed in there some way, somehow. That's what matters. They're having the time of their life. Would they like to have vaginal penetration at some point? Yes, they would, and they will. But they don't really care if it's this week, next week. They'll get there. But they're just having a lot of fun sexually, a lot of sexual connection.
I want to go back to when you work with a couple and you ask the question, which I know you always do, you've shared this for years, and they say, like you'll say to the guy, have you had sexual thoughts? And he's like, oh, no, sir, never.
She's too good for that.
And then when Glenn says, oh my word, dude, why are you marrying her? And then they both quickly look at each other.
And then I add, don't you dare marry her until you do.
And then it's like they just take this deep breath and their facial expressions change because they've been, first of all, either judging themselves super harshly or they've been, lying in a sense. Like, we can't tell anyone that we're really making out super heavy and we're really, sexually attracted to each other. But once Glenn kind of clears the air, they become super giggly, and then they almost, I think always then say, yeah, can't wait. Then the truth kind of comes out that, yeah, I am super sexually attracted. And that is to me such a sad thing too, that in our Christian culture, we are teaching dating couples to lie. We are encouraging that.
Yeah.
Because there is so much confusion around it. And that we think that, and I mean, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Tera, with it's wrong if you sexualize. To me, I think we have to be careful even with that as a standard or a judgment.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's what I believe. That's what was taught to me by the church.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to be
I have
clear.
to share this story real quickly because it's just such a classic. So this is a young couple we were pre-married, we were sitting with, and so they had gone to play tennis, and so they're wearing tennis attire. They had on shorts, and she emailed Phyllis to say, and she was just so upset. And she said, I don't know what happened, but we played tennis and we got back. He walked me to my apartment and we're talking, and it was just such a special moment. And I thought he was going to kiss me. And then suddenly he turned and ran away. Well, what she doesn't know is that simultaneously the guy is emailing me explaining that what happened was, he said it was unbelievable. It's like she looked angelic. Like it was in the evening. There was like a street light on or something, and she was sweating. And he said she was glistening. He goes, I got an erection, and I'm wearing these shorts. And I'm like, oh crap! I don't know what to do. And so he literally runs away because he feels a little awkward. So that our next session with him, they both share their experience, and he's pretty sure that somebody amongst these four is going to judge him and be like, what is wrong with you? You perverted, sick, twisted, godless heathen. You got an erection. we're just celebrating. We're like, oh, cool, dude. I love it that she is, and they were, I think, weeks from their wedding at that point. But he knew that was evil. He knew that was ungodly. Actually, it's pretty cool that he rocks your world that much.
Yeah.
But that's very, very countercultural. We don't really think in those terms.
Which is what brings us back to how damaging those messages are. That men receive, that if they are even attracted to their partner before they get married, that they are inherently wrong or bad. And so then therefore, just like women, we talk all the time about how we just have to flip the switch.
Right.
You know, like men are also oftentimes doing the same.
Yep.
Or if men are sexually active before marriage, they judge themselves harshly and deem themselves unworthy. And so even still, they're bringing that into their marriage. And we're both showing up with such high levels of shame that we stay secret from each other.
Yeah.
And this email did ask a lot about lust or attraction or things. So I'm glad that we touched on that, because those things still play a role. They don't stop when we walk down the aisle. And I think that that's a really good thought as well. You know, well, you were attracted to people before you got married, and now suddenly that just stops all of a sudden. Well, that actually doesn't happen. We're just lying.
Yep.
About it.
Yeah.
And then that lying creates divisiveness within ourselves and disconnection with our partner. And, you know, Phyllis, you mentioned how you were able to tell Glenn when you found yourself attracted to other people. And Wes and I have had those same kinds of conversations. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like those conversations are always easy, that those conversations always go super smoothly. Since moving here, our bubble has kind of been bursted in ways. We've been having really hard conversations when it comes to having friendships of the opposite sex. You know, we lived in our college town where we've had the same friends, and I didn't have any guy friends, and I only worked with Wes full time and our small team. And now I have coffees with guys, you know, I have a male business coach. Like I'm in these different types of scenarios, and I go to business networking groups where it's 85% men. And so Wes and I are having to have these new kinds of conversations. But I will say that the more open and authentic we can be.
Yes.
And in using these tools to bust down the shame, it is connecting even when it's hard to hear. It is not easy to hear if your partner is attracted to someone else. There can be hurt there. I don't want to act like, well, you shouldn't also feel hurt. If you feel hurt, process your hurt, you know, like, and with Wes, I just remind him, I'm like, bud, you will always know what's happening with me.
Yeah.
Always know what's happening.
Well, and I do want to say the faster you share it,
Yes.
the more powerful it is. And what I'm thinking about, Glenn went back to college many times. I think he has shared this. How many colleges did you go to before you? Nine before you
I didn't know that.
got your degrees.
One.
And I remember, so he was constantly kind of going back to school, often older, and many young women were in the classes. And there was one where he would constantly share with me, this is probably before, maybe you had a cell phone, I'm not sure, but there was one that would sit in front of him in class, and she always had on jeans and a thong, and the jeans would slip down so low that, you know, he could see her thong. And he would tell me, he would build things out of books so that he didn't have to be looking at her butt crack and her thong. And, you know, it was like he was so quick to share with me those kinds of things. Like, and then I know one time he got to class and it had been canceled. He didn't get the email, or no one did, or whatever. He had driven like an hour to get to the school. And then this girl said, hey, you want to go to coffee? And she was beautiful, you know, attractive. She was a classmate. But all the alarms went off in his head, like, this is a bad idea.
And she smelled really good.
Yes. But this must have been before cell phones, because I don't think you were, it was something where he could reach out to me super fast. So it wasn't until he got home that he shared all that with me. But I think that's the power. It's not that we're not constantly noticing beautiful people or even have to work with beautiful people or in class with beautiful people. But it's how quickly you share it with your partner that then there's no power it's like it loses its power. And yet also I was always so thankful, but I never worried because I knew he was just going to tell me right away.
Right.
And so I think that if you are, I know for some of you listeners, you may be processing tons of things, but part of it is just sharing. It's the honesty. It's the sooner the better. Like, be quick about it. That's when whatever the thing is, and it doesn't gain power.
Yeah. And I would even suggest, and I get to hear what you're saying. If that's what happens for you and Wes, that's what happens for you and Wes. And you said hurt. I imagine there's fear too. I'm conjecturing, which is dangerous, but I think that dissipates over time. And every couple's unique, so you can't say it's a math equation. But for Phyllis and me, and we're older, I get that. But for me, there's never any hurt. I don't like saying never. There's never any hurt, and there's never any fear. I mean, for Phyllis to say whoever, Brad Pitt, George Clooney, Ryan Gosling, pick somebody. I think they're gorgeous too. It's a joy experience seeing them. And okay. And so there's nothing that happens for me inside of it. I'm just observing going, look at that. We saw George Clooney and Brad Pitt. I just love them. I love their chemistry together. But it was a dumb movie. But I just loved seeing their interaction.
Right.
And they're gorgeous. And I know they have makeup artists doing their stuff, but whatever. Right. But there is no hurt or fear for me in that. So I think it actually gets easier.
I could see it getting easier for sure. I just know for our listeners, especially the first few times, because this is a new concept for Wes and I. Right. And we're talking about people that I interact with on a regular basis. And I also know, Wes is going into the airlines. And so we're already talking about for him to be with flight attendants, what that experience is going to be like and processing those things out. But I know what we're not going to do. We're not going to shame each other when we experience those things. And we're also not going to live under a rock to think that those moments won't happen. And so I can see that with this episode, just the overall message that men, because we're focusing on men today, received about lust. That was a huge word that we kind of dissected and dove into, and the shame that can create, but also how to process the joy of seeing someone of the opposite sex and even being in friendship with them while safeguarding your relationship and what that looks like and creating safety for yourself and your partner. There are so many other thoughts that I'm having, but we are definitely out of time on this episode that I want to dive into about messages that men received, some of which break my heart in the role that even I played with mine and Wes's relationship and damage that I created for him, which we've done a few episodes kind of around about men's need for sex, versus just wanting to get some, it's a hobby for them. But the deep connection that men desire, I think that's a message that they did not receive or were told, you're too sensitive or things like that. That I really think that we should dive more into. But we need to do the core emotion wheel.
Oh, goodness.
And that is the 4-minute tool that Dr. Glenn and Phyllis created to actually help you identify what is happening for you. That way, when I process, hey, Wes, I had coffee with a guy today and, he was an attractive guy. For Wes to actually know, ooh, it is fear that I have, or it is hurt that I have. What is actually happening in his body? And for me, what's happening in mine? So we can actually get it out of our system and connect over those moments instead of disconnect with each other.
Well, I'll just do it on, I guess, my sexual journey.
Okay.
How about that? Just kind of an issue-specific wheel about that, which I'm old, so it's a long journey. But for me, so much sadness that for so many reasons, for myself, just how clueless I was, all of the damage that my cluelessness set up for me. Forget you. That's definitely true. But for me, my gosh, it was not my plan. I always say 24 hours before our wedding, we were excited about happily ever after. 48 hours after, we're like, oh, what the heck?
Wow. Yeah.
So much sadness. And because I know it's happening for so many people still in this culture today. A lot of anger about that. I'm not judging Clement of Alexandria, all the church leaders from years ago, but I don't think they had any clue the damage that they were doing. And we're still doing it today.
Yeah.
Just with so much of what we discussed today, so much anger about that. Both secondary anger over the sadness, but also we're driven. We have to change this culturally. It is such a desperate need. Fear in what people heard today, what's the message they're going to walk away with? I know it's such a charged issue for some people that this may be literally the last episode they ever listen to. Sadness in that too. Because we do want to present it well. We do want to present it, our genuine heart perspective in it. Lots of guilt and shame that I contributed. Oh, dear goodness, all the way back to the Preachers Club. I contributed a damage so many people, so many times from a good intention, from a good motivation, and did so much harm. And I wish I could go back literally to every person that I ever talked to about so many things, but certainly about sexuality, and change that messaging to them. Hurt, so much hurt for myself, certainly for you, for so many people. Of course, our woundings, we wounded each other. We lost count how many thousands and maybe tens of thousands of times we wounded each other in this whole arena. Loneliness, oh my gosh, the times. I remember so many times just crying in prayer that I wish God would kill me, castrate me, something, just to get me out of any sexual desire, sexual interest, because it was such a turmoil, certainly between us, but just within myself. I just felt so broken and damaged and wrong and evil and disgusting and repulsive, et cetera, and it just felt so alone in that. Tons and tons of joy, just blown away what we get to experience now. We have a sex date scheduled tonight, which I'm hoping to break some world records in it. And it's just stunning to me. I just, so many aspects of it, what we get to experience, the fact that we can share it on a podcast, we can talk about it, the fact that we get to just share it together. I don't know. It's a whole new world. And we were late bloomers, got a late start. I'm convinced this couple, they've been married 11 days. I'm like, they're going to, oh my gosh, their journey, their life experience is a different universe than what we experienced together. So much joy. Our personal experience, but then also the mission that we're on, that we can change this for couples so that they have a very, very different experience.
Wow.
I think that's 8.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I would say let's just do one today.
Okay.
Yeah.
For sake of time. And so that was incredible.
Yep.
Thank you.
If this is your first episode, wow, you picked one.
Your first and your last.
Your first that you came in. And I hear that fear, Glenn, that it is easy because this is what we are talking about. One, it is very vulnerable because there is so much judgment on this topic. Yeah. And so if you find yourself really feeling spiky, if there's tension happening in your body around this episode, one, you can always reach out just like this guy did who emailed in, and I'm so glad that he did because he was kind. That is always helpful if you can be kind in your reach out. But two, ask yourself, what is happening for you around this topic? Yep. What is firing in your body?
And what am I missing?
And what
am I missing?
Yeah. And even do a core emotion wheel with yourself around it. Find out if there's fear around this topic for you, if there's hurt, if there's shame. But specifically, just like Glenn just did an issue specific wheel, you can download our core emotion wheel for free if you haven't already. It will be in the show notes. But sit down for 2 minutes and dig into yourself and be like, okay, I sense tension. This episode triggered something inside my body. Let me find out what it is and dig into that for yourself, because we want to have these conversations. Our goal is to break open the shame that we as a society have built, especially around sex and especially around these topics that we keep hidden, which is creating divisiveness, creating pain in individuals and in marriages, because we can't accurately effective marriage if we're not talking about these things that are affecting them, whether we recognize it or not, they're affecting them continuously. And so thank you for being here. I encourage you, your only call to action today is to do a core emotion wheel around this topic. And if you need extra support, to please reach out. We do all of this because
you need this.
You deserve this.
So
let's do this.
Let's do this.